My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 34 years old, a senior legal advisor in Manhattan, and the proud owner of a penthouse I bought after over a decade of 70-hour work weeks and clawing my way up through a firm where most partners didn't even know my name. I thought the hardest battles in my life were behind me. I was wrong, because nothing, not the courtrooms, not the boardrooms, not the ruthless mergers, prepared me for the moment my mother slapped me across the face in front of 350 wedding guests. It happened at my sister's wedding. The chandeliers hadn't even cooled from the first dance when it happened. I was cornered near the dessert table by my mother, her voice low but sharp as a blade. "Lauren," she said, "you're going to hand your sister the penthouse tonight." I blinked, thinking I'd misheard, but then she raised her voice, deliberately, so the nearby guests, the cousins, the aunts, the business acquaintances could hear, "Give your sister the penthouse. You're alone. She's starting a family." The room quieted just enough for her words to cut through, the jazz music and crystal chatter. I saw people turning toward us. Some tilted their heads. Others pretended to sip champagne and eavesdrop. I smiled, small, almost imperceptible, and replied calmly, "No." She didn't flinch. "Then you're no daughter of mine." And before I could process the cruelty of her words, her hand came down. Hard, loud, sharp. Her palm struck the side of my face with a crack that silenced the entire ballroom. Time stopped. Forks froze in midair. Gasps filled the space where music used to be. Even the DJ, poor man, fumbled the transition to the next track. I felt the sting bloom across my cheek, heat rising in waves, but I didn't lift a hand to cover it. I didn't run, I didn't cry. I looked at her, at the mother who had raised me to smile for photos, sit still, never ask for anything, and always put family first. And then I said it, softly, but loud enough for her and everyone else to hear. "You just lost me." I turned and walked away from the applause, the speeches, the slices of cake yet to be served. I left behind the bride and groom, the flashing cameras, the whispered judgments, and the woman who had taught me that love came with terms and conditions. But I know what you're thinking. Who gives up on their own family like that? Who walks out of a wedding without a backward glance? To understand that moment, that slap, that sentence, that walk, you need to understand everything that led up to it. The childhood hierarchy, the emotional erosion, the years of silence that disguised themselves as keeping the peace. Because this wasn't about a penthouse. It was never about real estate. It was about control. It was about power. It was about a family that had spent years training me to feel small for daring to be enough. So if you're still watching, if any part of you has ever felt like the disposable one, the overlooked one, the one who was loved just a little less, stay with me. Because what happened at that wedding wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of everything. People always say childhood shapes you. Mine didn't shape me. It split me, cleanly, silently, into two versions of a daughter. One favored, one forgotten. Chloe was the golden child. She sparkled, literally. My earliest memory of her isn't her face, but her shoes. Pink satin ballet slippers with tiny rhinestones stitched along the arch. She wore them to her first recital. I remember sitting cross-legged in the front row, clapping so hard my palms burned, while Mom cried beside me like Chloe had just landed a role in Swan Lake. I was 9. Chloe was 6. I had walked into that auditorium with scuffed sneakers I had superglued together the night before because Mom said new shoes weren't in the budget this month. That moment stayed with me. Not because I wanted rhinestones, but because it was the first time I understood that some people in a family don't have to ask. Others aren't even allowed to hope. Chloe asked and things appeared. Costumes, glittery backpacks, summer camps, private lessons. When she wanted to quit violin after 3 weeks, Mom sold a bracelet to cover the non-refundable fee. When I asked for a used copy of a chemistry textbook, I got a look that said I'd asked for a yacht. In high school, Chloe was allowed to find herself. I was expected to find a job. She painted. I cleaned hotel bathrooms on weekends. She skipped classes to audition for musicals. I stayed up tutoring other kids for $20 an hour. I paid for my own prom dress. Chloe got hers custom altered. I didn't resent her, not at first. It wasn't her fault she was the sun everyone orbited. She didn't ask for the pedestal. But over time, it became impossible not to notice how high they kept lifting her, and how hard they looked away from me. When it came time for college, I'd already filled out the FAFSA alone, scoured forums for scholarships, and picked a school with a work-study program. Mom and Dad said they were so proud of my independence. That phrase would become their favorite excuse. We didn't help because you're just so capable, Lauren. Chloe needs more support. She's sensitive, you know. You don't want to be the kind of sister who holds success over someone's head. I never wanted that. I just wanted it to mean something. I wanted someone to show up to my recitals, to clap when I made the honor roll, to ask how my finals went. Instead, I got polite nods and, "That's nice, honey. Chloe got an A in improv." I got silence when I emailed them my college acceptance letter. Chloe got a dinner party when she was cast as tree number 2 in her high school play. Even birthdays were lopsided. Chloe had themes: roller skating, spa, day, brunch with friends. I had a card, sometimes with $20 inside, always signed Love Mom and Dad. No note, no effort, just a transaction. And yet, I didn't rebel. I didn't scream or cry or demand fairness. I worked, I stacked internships, I networked while classmates got drunk on spring break. I rented basements and lived off black coffee and stale granola bars. And by the time I turned 27, I made more than both my parents combined. But even then, even at the peak of my success, I never quite felt seen. They never asked how I was doing. But when Chloe got laid off from a short-lived gallery job, they emailed me together. "Can you help your sister with rent for a few months? She's really stressed. It's temporary. You know we'd help if we could." So I sent the money twice. No thank you note, no acknowledgement, just silence. Until the next ask. Years later, when I stood alone in the penthouse I bought entirely on my own, I still couldn't let myself feel proud. Because deep down, I was waiting for someone to say, "You did it, Lauren. We see you." But they never did. Chloe was the daughter who made them feel needed. I was the daughter who made them feel inadequate. That was the difference. And that was the beginning of the fracture, the one that would one day explode in the middle of a wedding ballroom, dressed in pastel florals and dripping with champagne, where my own mother would raise her hand not to bless, but to humiliate. But we're not there yet. This story, my story, began long before the slap. It began with a pair of ruined sneakers and a pair of rhinestoned slippers. After college, I didn't coast. I climbed. I entered a mid-tier corporate law firm in Manhattan where ambition was currency and burnout was a badge of honor. I started as an entry-level research assistant, basically a glorified ghost in the back room, and clawed my way into case strategy, litigation prep, and finally into my own glass-walled office. Not because anyone handed it to me, but because no one would outwork me. There were nights I didn't go home, weeks I didn't cook a single meal. My social life could have fit into a single sticky note. I was the one who stayed when the lights were off and everyone else had gone to happy hour. My hands, once soft from piano lessons I had to quit, became calloused from thumbing through paper files and typing until my knuckles cracked. My lower back ached constantly from sitting for 12-hour stretches. I memorized the sound of the janitor's cart. I saw the sun rise over my office desk more times than I care to count. There were no shortcuts, no parental stipends, no family name to lean on. Just me, and a mountain of NDAs, deadlines, and coffee stains on legal pads. The clients were demanding, the partners were indifferent. The interns came and went with glossy smiles and daddy-funded handbags. And I stayed. I stayed through the mergers, the layoffs, the late-night panic calls, and the weekends when I was the only person in the building. People called me resilient like it was a compliment. Like resilience didn't mean swallowing stress until your stomach lining eroded. Like, it didn't mean canceling vacations you never booked because you knew you'd be guilted into staying anyway. Still, I pushed forward. At 31, I landed a role as senior advisor, youngest in the firm's history. My caseload was brutal, but my reputation was solid. I became the fixer, the woman who handled difficult clients and impossible deadlines without flinching. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to want something big, something visible, something that would scream, I did this, I built this. I wanted a home that felt like a reward, not a necessity. A sanctuary. I started looking carefully, methodically, because I wasn't about to throw my sweat equity into just anything. I toured condos, brownstones, lofts with no natural light, apartments with views of brick walls. And then, one February morning, I stepped into the penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows, south-facing light, a view that spilled across the Manhattan skyline and kissed the river at sunset. Every detail was sharp but elegant. Steel beams, warm wood, matte black finishes. It didn't ask to be noticed. It simply belonged. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the same way. The asking price was dizzying. $2.1 million. I ran the numbers 100 different ways. I worked with a broker who talked to me like I was a trust fund kid until I pulled up my portfolio and shut him up with math. I signed the offer in silence, alone in a room with my heart pounding. When the seller accepted, I didn't pop champagne. I just stared at the email and let the corners of my mouth rise slowly, carefully, into the kind of smile I hadn't worn since I was a kid. I moved in on a Tuesday. No parents to help, no sister to decorate, just me, a mattress, 3 suitcases, and a growing sense that maybe, just maybe, I had carved out something no one could take from me. I bought each piece of furniture slowly, intentionally. Every item had to earn its place. A charcoal velvet couch, a hand-thrown ceramic lamp, a bookshelf that spanned an entire wall and housed both case law volumes and the battered novels that got me through law school. The space became mine, not just in deed, but in soul. I hosted small dinners with close friends who knew how far I'd come. They toasted me with real admiration, not envy masked as backhanded compliments. My therapist once told me, "This home isn't just property, it's evidence. It proves your story happened, and that you survived it." She was right. I had survived the subtle erasure, the years of invisibility, the constant insinuation that my success made me hard to love. I had turned every slammed door into a stepping stone. And this penthouse? This was at the top of the staircase. But I made one mistake. I underestimated how threatened people can become when you build something they can't control. I didn't know, couldn't have known, that this home, my sanctuary, would become a target, a bargaining chip, a prize my parents would try to transfer, like an heirloom, to my sister, as if it had ever belonged to anyone but me. I didn't see it coming, not then, but I would. And when it came, it wouldn't be a quiet ask or a whispered plea. It would be public, violent, and humiliating. The battlefield, a wedding, the casualty, trust, and the war? It started the day I dared to own something they couldn't explain. If I was the one who fought for survival, Chloe was the one who floated. My sister had always been delicate, not in body, but in spirit, the kind of girl who cried during perfume commercials and rescued pigeons with broken wings. From a young age, she declared she wanted to be an artist. When asked what kind, she simply said, all of them. She painted for 2 semesters at a liberal arts college in Vermont before dropping out, claiming the institution was stifling her creativity. Then came poetry, pottery, performance art. Every month was a new medium. Every failed attempt was met with a gentle pat on the back from my parents and a murmured, "At least she's expressing herself." When Chloe moved in with Daniel, her college sweetheart turned financial crutch, the family treated it like a victory. Never mind that he paid her rent. Never mind that she didn't have a job or health insurance. She was finding herself. She was living for her truth. She was too sensitive for the corporate world, I never resented Chloe's softness. What I resented was how they praised it while scorning my strength. At family dinners, my father would lean back in his chair, swirling wine and beaming at Chloe like she was a national treasure. "Your sister," he once said, placing a hand over his heart, "has a golden soul, so full of compassion, so full of feeling." Then he turned to me. "And Lauren, well, she knows how to make money." That was it. No warmth, no pride, just a transactional nod to my existence. The implication always hung in the air. I was the bank. Chloe was the blessing. I'd smile tightly, take another sip of wine, and excuse myself to answer a client call that didn't exist. Not because I needed space, but because I refused to cry in front of them. The worst part? They weren't even subtle. I started noticing small withdrawals from the family trust account, payments I never authorized. When I asked my mother, she waved it off. "Oh, honey, Chloe just needed some help getting her gallery together. It's nothing." The gallery never opened. Then came the health insurance plan. Somehow, my employer-sponsored family coverage included one extra dependent. Chloe. I confronted HR thinking it was a clerical error. It wasn't. My father had helped me set it up without my consent. My parents used me and my financial infrastructure, taken done, to compensate for Chloe's every whim, every stumble, every failure. And still, they painted me as the cold one. There was one dinner I'll never forget. The 5 of us, my parents, Chloe, Daniel, and me, at a farm-to-table place Chloe loved, but I secretly loathed. As the waiter cleared the plates, my father lifted his glass and toasted, "To Chloe, who reminds us that life isn't about achievement, it's about heart." Chloe blushed. Daniel grinned. My mother nodded with misty eyes. "And to Lauren," he added after a beat, "for making all this possible." The table chuckled. I didn't. That night, on the ride home, I stared out the cab window and said nothing, but inside, a quiet realization had settled into my chest like a stone. Love in our family was conditional, and I had bought mine. But I kept showing up for holidays, for birthdays, for Chloe, not because I was chasing their love, but because I needed to know it wasn't me who gave up, that I hadn't turned my back on them. They had turned theirs on me. So when Chloe announced her engagement to Daniel and my parents planned the wedding like it was the royal affair of the century, I did what I always did. I contributed. I paid for the floral deposit when their card declined. I covered the emergency tailor when the bridesmaids' dresses arrived wrong. I booked the pianist when the original one canceled last minute, quietly, without thanks. Because deep down, I hoped maybe this time, just this once, they'd see me. They didn't. And I had no idea that the very thing I built to protect myself, the penthouse, would become the weapon they'd try to use against me. The morning of Chloe's wedding shimmered like something from a bridal magazine. Crisp air, ivory orchids flown in from Ecuador, the hum of string quartets tuning up under the open glass canopy. It was flawless, painfully, meticulously, flawless. I arrived at the estate venue just after sunrise, all ready in hair and makeup. As maid of honor, I'd committed to being on from dawn to the final dance. My dress was a muted lilac, Chloe's favorite shade on me, she'd said, which I found both ironic and strategic. The silk hugged tighter than expected, and the heels were impractical for the vineyard gravel, but I smiled anyway. That's what you do, right? When it's your little sister's big day, when your parents are fluttering like socialite butterflies, when you've footed half the vendor's bills, but no one remembers who saved the day when the cake decorator caught the flu. Guests arrived in waves, sculpted gowns, sharp tuxes, champagne laughter, and every third person seemed to pull me aside for the same compliment. "Lauren, that penthouse of yours, and it's stunning. I saw it on Chloe's Instagram. Corner unit, right? What's that worth now? 5 million? Must be nice. Do you ever even use the second bedroom?" I laughed politely, brushing it off. But each comment was a needle. Not because they admired the place. I was proud of that apartment. I'd earned every square inch, but because their tone wasn't admiration, it was assumption, like I had nothing better to do than hoard real estate. At the cocktail hour, I noticed something strange. Clusters of my relatives, aunts, uncles, even second cousins, were huddled unusually close to my parents, whispering, glancing my way, then back again. My mother stood like a queen beside the oyster bar, her smile graceful but tight. My father, usually aloof at events, was oddly engaged, guiding people, laughing too loud, patting Chloe's back like she'd won a Nobel Prize. A familiar anxiety gripped my chest. That feeling I used to get as a kid when I sensed something was being decided without me. I moved toward the patio for air. That's when I heard it. 2 women, not 5 feet away, chatting in hushed tones near the hydrangeas. "Gidem, and the penthouse is the real surprise," one said with a wink. "The wedding gift?" the other asked, startled. The first woman nodded, swirling her champagne. "Can you imagine? A Manhattan penthouse as a starter home. Chloe's so lucky. I heard the parents worked something out with Lauren." I didn't hear the rest. I didn't need to. A chill rippled down my spine. I stood frozen, half concealed behind a potted fig tree, my bouquet dangling at my side. Inside me, something cracked. Like a hairline fracture you don't feel until you try to stand on it. The penthouse? My penthouse? It couldn't be. There was no way. No one, not Chloe, not my parents, had ever asked me for it. No one had mentioned it. But then again, no one had ever asked when they put Chloe on my insurance either, or when they used my savings to fund her last 3 projects. Was this just another quiet decision they made for me? I clutched the stem of my bouquet tighter, willing my face into calm. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. Maybe someone misheard. Maybe Chloe had said something flippant that was twisted into gossip. But even as I rationalized, I could feel my gut pulling in the opposite direction. That woman hadn't sounded speculative. She sounded informed, and the looks, the glances, the murmurs. Suddenly, the praise from guests took on a different flavor. Not admiration. Foreshadowing. As if they knew something I didn't. As if I was the last person in the room to realize I'd already been written into someone else's fairy tale. As the donor. I scanned the crowd, eyes landing on my father, his hand on Chloe's back again, gesturing proudly to a relative. He caught my gaze, nodded, smiled, and for the first time, I didn't smile back. Instead, I turned away and stared out across the manicured lawn, the string quartet playing something gentle behind me. I whispered, just to myself, "They wouldn't dare." But a small voice inside me answered, "Wouldn't they?" It was just after dinner when my father touched my elbow and leaned in. "Lauren," he said, voice calm but clipped. "We'd like a quick word." "Upstairs." "Now." I glanced at my champagne glass, still half full, my shoes pinched. My head ached from hours of holding up smiles. But something in his tone made it clear. This wasn't optional. He led me through the ornate hallway of the estate, up the velvet-trimmed staircase, to a small private lounge overlooking the garden. My mother was already there, seated like a queen, one leg crossed over the other, fingers folded tightly in her lap. The air was thick, too thick. No small talk, no pleasantries. "Sit," my mother said. I didn't. I stood. My father shut the door behind him, took 2 steps forward, and launched straight in. "We've decided, Naim," he said, "that the penthouse should go to Chloe." I blinked. "Excuse me?" My mother straightened in her seat. "You've done well for yourself, Lauren. You have more than you need. Your sister's starting a new chapter. That place would be the perfect gift to begin her life with Daniel." I stared at them, lips parting slightly. "You mean, you're asking me to give Chloe my home?" My father scoffed, like I was being dramatic. "It's not just about the apartment. It's about family, about legacy, about sharing." I laughed once, sharp and stunned. "Sharing? I bought that place." With my name on every paper, every bill. I've been paying that mortgage since I was 26. My mother stood now, her tone clipped and businesslike. You'll still have your career, your income, your independence. You've always been the strong one. Chloe, she needs support. No, I said, shaking my head. Number, you're not asking, you're expecting. My father's jaw twitched. Lauren, don't be selfish. Your sister just got married. This is not the time to make a scene. A scene? I repeated. You corner me in a private room during her wedding and demand I sign over my home, and I'm the one making a scene? There was a long, heavy silence. Then my mother said, You're not listening. And my father added, quieter but more dangerous. If you refuse, Lauren, don't bother showing up for Christmas, or birthdays, or anything else, because as far as this family's concerned, you'll have walked out. There it was, the ultimatum. Give up the penthouse, or be cut off completely. I took a slow breath, the kind you take before walking into fire. I built that life without your help, I said. You can't use family as a knife and expect me to hand you the handle. And I turned to leave. But before I could reach the door, my mother hissed, Then I suppose we'll let the guests know ourselves. You clearly don't have the grace to do it right. I paused. What did you say? But she was already moving, swift, elegant, practiced. She brushed past me, my father in tow. They didn't wait for my answer. Back in the main hall, the room had shifted. The lights had dimmed, the music softened, and the dance floor was being cleared for speeches. I moved through the crowd like a ghost, heart thudding, mouth dry. That's when I heard it. My father's voice through the microphone. He was standing at the front of the ballroom, one hand resting gently on Chloe's shoulder. She looked confused, nervous even, but smiled like a well-trained actress. We have one last surprise, he announced, a symbol of love, of generosity, and of sisterhood. I froze. Tonight, he continued, we are honored to share that Lauren has gifted her penthouse to Chloe and Daniel as their wedding present. Applause erupted, a few gasps, then a cheer. I couldn't breathe. Heads turned toward me, smiles widened, glasses were raised, and there I stood, humiliated in lavender silk, with 350 pairs of eyes expecting me to nod, to smile, to confirm the lie. I didn't move. Instead, I stepped forward, took a slow walk to the center of the dance floor. People parted to let me through. I met my father's eyes, then Chloe's. I turned to the crowd and raised my voice, steady, even. I never said that. The room went silent. I never offered my home, and I certainly wasn't told this would be part of tonight's surprise. The silence cracked into murmurs. Chloe looked panicked. My mother reached me in 3 strides, and before I could brace, she slapped me. A loud, echoing crack. Gasps. The room stopped breathing. I stood still. My cheek stung. My ears rang. But I didn't flinch. I looked her square in the eye and smiled. A small, calm, devastating smile. Then I leaned in, just enough for only her to hear, and said, You just lost me. I turned, and I walked out of the wedding, out of their story, and back into my own. The cab ride home was nearly silent, except for the occasional buzz of my phone. It vibrated again, and again, and again, like a wasp caught in my coat pocket. I didn't check it. I stared out the window, chin resting lightly on the back of my hand, the sting from my cheek warming against the cold glass. When I finally stepped into the penthouse, the contrast hit me like a wave. Warm light, polished floors, the faint scent of the vanilla candle I'd left burning hours ago. Familiar. Safe. And yet, everything inside me felt wrecked. I dropped my purse by the door, kicked off my heels, walked past the kitchen without turning on another light. The slap still burned. Not just physically. I stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, staring out at Manhattan. The skyline glittered like a jewel box spilled across black velvet. Skyscrapers blinked with life. Taxis darted like fireflies. Somewhere, someone was proposing. laughing, starting over. The world went on. Only my world had cracked open. In the reflection of the glass, I saw the red imprint on my face, a perfect handprint, my mother's fingers like branches reaching across my skin. I didn't cry. Not yet. I sat on the couch, spine upright, feet bare against the hardwood floor. My phone kept vibrating. I finally reached for it, not to respond, just to look. 24 messages. Mom, you embarrassed the family. Mom again. How could you be so ungrateful? Then, I raised you better than this. Followed by, you owe Chloe an apology. I scrolled. Chloe, you ruined my wedding. I'll never forgive you. Then a picture, her in her gown, eyes red, mascara streaked. Chloe again, you know Mom hit you because she loves you. I locked the phone, dropped it face down on the coffee table. I didn't move. My living room was silent except for the distant hum of the city below. I could hear the occasional honk, the deep rumble of the subway. But in here, it was a tomb. I pressed my fingers gently against my cheek, tracing the edges of that welt. Not because it hurt, but because I needed to remember. The glass of water I poured sat untouched. I didn't turn on the TV. I didn't respond to the endless pings and buzzes. I sat, and I breathed. And I tried to understand how the people who claimed to love me could be the same people who tried to strip me of my dignity in front of 350 strangers. It wasn't about the penthouse. It was never about the penthouse. It was about control, ownership, entitlement. They didn't see my success as mine. They saw it as ours, as something I should redistribute to keep the fragile image of the family intact. And when I resisted, they punished me, publicly. I leaned back, eyes closed, body finally beginning to tremble in the aftershock of it all. The kind of shaking that comes not from cold, but from the body's way of processing trauma it hadn't had time to feel in the moment. But still, I didn't cry, not tonight, not yet. I watched the city until the stars faded, until the sky began to lighten. A new day. And with it, something shifted inside me. Not rage, not revenge. Just clarity. This family had made a choice. And now, so would I. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence from me. 3 days of noise from them. Voicemails, texts, emails, waves crashing against a wall I no longer cared to rebuild. I didn't respond. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because finally, I did. It was on the morning of the 4th day that the envelope came. Heavy stock cream paper, no return address, hand-delivered by courier. I didn't open it right away. I poured myself a cup of coffee first, sat at the dining table, watched the sunlight dance across the marble. Only when I was centered, calm, focused, did I slit it open. There, in 6 crisp pages, was the true nature of my parents. A formal legal request, drafted by their family attorney, demanding that I transfer ownership of my penthouse to Chloe. Mitchell Stein within 30 days. It was all written in sanitized legal language, reallocation of family property, maintaining familial harmony, moral duty of elder siblings, and the worst of all, failure to comply may result in estrangement and public disclosure of Lauren Mitchell's lack of familial loyalty. I read every word without blinking. Then I reached for my phone. Not to call anyone, but to photograph it. Every single page, front and back. Then I opened a folder on my cloud drive and created a new subfolder. /evidence /family abuse /penthouse threats I uploaded them with quiet precision. Not because I was scared, because I was ready. They had put it in writing. They had handed me a weapon. What they didn't realize, what they never understood, was that I live and breathe contracts. I've voided multi-million-dollar mergers over the misuse of a single word. And now, sitting here in my silk robe, with my face still faintly bruised from my mother's slap, I realized they'd made their first mistake. I flipped through the pages again, highlighting lines that violated multiple state-level real estate statutes, inheritance coercion codes, and most delicious of all, financial abuse clauses that they had unintentionally confessed to. Because in trying to paint me as selfish, they exposed their own entitlement. In trying to pressure me with a formal demand, they documented their manipulation. They forgot who I am, who they raised me to be, who they underestimated. I ran my fingers along the edge of the page, a slow breath filling my lungs. So this was it. Not just a slap. Not just emotional warfare dressed up as maternal concern. This was now legal. This was now war. But I wouldn't fight it their way. There would be no shouting, no social media blasts, no dramatic confrontations. This would be slow, strategic, quiet, like a courtroom takedown built over months, and they would never see it coming. I took another sip of coffee. Then I opened a blank notebook, labeled the top of the page, Action Plan. Save all communication going forward. Consult personal attorney. Quietly. Pull property title deeds and cross-reference legal threats. Secure digital backups of all shared financial history. Review past money transfers and hidden family transactions. Prepare a trust strategy. Lock the penthouse under legal shield. Document everything. I closed the notebook gently, feeling an unfamiliar sense of peace settle over me. They thought I was vulnerable, but what they really did was hand me the blueprint to their downfall. They think I'm weak. I whispered into the stillness of the room, but they just gave me the weapon. And I was going to use it. Not to destroy them, but to free myself, to draw a line that would never be crossed again. Because sometimes justice doesn't look like revenge. It looks like clarity. It looks like control. It looks like choosing yourself. On record, it had been a week since the letter, since the wedding, since my mother's slap, my father's threat, and my quiet decision not to break, but to build. I hadn't heard a word from Chloe or Daniel. Not a text, not a call, just silence. And in its own way, that silence was loud. Then, one Thursday afternoon, as I sat by the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse reviewing trust paperwork, my building's concierge called. "There's a Miss Evelyn Pierce here to see you. Says she's family." Evelyn, my cousin on my mother's side, a commercial attorney in Philadelphia. We hadn't spoken in years. Occasional family barbecues, polite nods at funerals. What was she doing here? I hesitated, but told them to send her up. When the elevator doors opened, Evelyn stepped out in a navy pantsuit, her hair pulled into a soft bun, makeup minimal, but sharp. She was older than me by 10 years and had the aura of a woman who never entered a room unless she intended to make it better, or burn it down. "Lauren," she said gently, "can I come in?" I nodded. She walked in and looked around at the penthouse, then at me. Her gaze softened. "They really tried to take this from you," she said quietly. I didn't respond, just motioned for her to sit. She placed her briefcase by her feet and sat across from me at the table. For a long moment, we both said nothing. Then she spoke. "I was at the wedding. I saw everything." That stopped me. I looked up. She continued. "I wasn't invited officially. Aunt May brought me as her +1, but I was there when your mother slapped you, when they dragged you out in front of 350 people and announced that you were gifting your penthouse to Chloe." I swallowed. The air felt tighter. "I didn't know you were there," I murmured. She nodded. "And they didn't know I stayed to watch." Her voice dropped to a more serious tone. "Lauren, what they did wasn't just cruel. It was illegal. The public coercion, the financial pressure backed by that letter. I've seen corporate sharks act with more restraint." I blinked. The weight of being seen, really seen, hit harder than I expected. She leaned forward slightly. "If you choose to pursue legal action, whether it's a restraining order, defamation counter, or a trust fortification, I'll back you. I'll testify." As a lawyer and as your family, I stared at her, unsure what to say. For days, I'd prepared for battle alone. Every spreadsheet, every backup file, every emotional wall had been built for a solo war. But here she was, not just offering support, offering belief. I found my voice. Why? Evelyn paused, then smiled sadly. Because I know what it's like to be the less lovable daughter. My eyes widened slightly. She nodded, reading my thoughts. Yeah. Aunt Claire never told you, but she used to treat me like a backup singer. To her golden child, Julie. Everything Julie wanted, she got. I paid for my own law school while Mom bought Julie a condo in Miami. A small, bitter laugh escaped me. So it runs in the blood. Maybe, she said. But it stops with us. Her words hung in the air, firm and quiet. For the first time in a week, something shifted inside me. Not strategy, not defiance. Hope. It didn't matter that Chloe hadn't called, or that my mother's last text said, "You'll regret humiliating us." What mattered was that someone had looked at me, not as the overachiever, not as the cold one, not as the wallet, but as a person. Evelyn reached into her bag and pulled out a small leather folder. I drafted a few outlines, nothing binding yet, just ideas. Trust shields, civil injunction templates, legal precedent for familial financial abuse cases. Take a look when you're ready. I accepted the folder, fingers brushing hers. As she rose to leave, she turned to me one last time. Lauren, your silence after that slap, that wasn't weakness, it was restraint. But don't confuse silence with surrender. You've got fire in you. Use it. She smiled. Let me know if you want me in the trenches with you. Then she left. The door clicked shut behind her, and I sat there, folder in hand, heart a little steadier. It turns out not everyone in a broken family is blind, and sometimes the most unexpected branches of your bloodline reach back. A few days after Evelyn's visit, I scheduled a session with Dr. Matthews. I'd seen her on and off over the years during the worst stretches of law school after a brutal client betrayal, and once after Chloe's overdose scare. But this time felt different, heavier, quieter. Not a crisis I needed to solve, but a truth I needed to face. Her office hadn't changed. Neutral walls, an orchid near the window, and a deep green velvet armchair where I always sat. It smelled faintly of sandalwood and lemon tea. Lauren, she greeted me warmly, gesturing to the chair. I was wondering when I'd see you again. I managed a half smile and sat down. For a while, I didn't say much. I watched the way light hit the floor through the blinds, creating sharp lines like prison bars. Maybe that was how I felt, boxed in by something I couldn't yet name. Dr. Matthews didn't push. She just waited, legs crossed, hands resting loosely on her notepad. Finally, I said, my mother slapped me. In public, in front of hundreds of people. A pause, then softly, tell me more. I exhaled. It was at my sister's wedding. They wanted me to hand over my penthouse as a gift to Chloe. When I said no, they turned it into a public ambush, announced I was donating it. When I corrected them, my mother slapped me. And then, nothing, no apology, just silence, followed by a legal letter demanding I transfer ownership to Chloe within 30 days. Dr. Matthews nodded, absorbing. And what did you feel? She asked. I was quiet for a moment. Shame, not for saying no, but for still wanting them to love me after everything. That sentence hung in the room like dust in sunlight. She tilted her head. What you experienced wasn't just a family conflict, Lauren. That was emotional and financial abuse, cloaked in tradition and entitlement. It wasn't love, it was manipulation. I nodded slowly. Then she said it. One sentence. A scalpel wrapped in silk. You didn't lose your family, Lauren. You lost the illusion of one. And just like that, I broke. Tears came, not in sobs, but in a quiet, steady stream. Not frantic, not dramatic. Just surrender. I didn't wipe them away. I let them fall, cooling my cheeks, marking something invisible that had finally surfaced. I wasn't mourning my parents. I was mourning the idea of parents who had never truly existed. The belief that if I just worked harder, succeeded more, gave enough, they'd finally choose me, not as a wallet, not as a fallback plan, but as a daughter. That illusion had protected me for years, and now it was gone. Dr. Matthews handed me a tissue box, but didn't say a word. She knew silence was sometimes the only mirror we needed. After a while, I whispered, "I feel stupid." "Why?" she asked gently. Because I knew. Deep down, I always knew. But I still hoped they'd change. She leaned forward just a little. "Hope is not stupidity, Lauren. It's the most human thing about you, and now that you've outgrown that hope, you're finally free to rebuild. On your terms." I stared at her, and for the first time in days, maybe longer, I felt a breath fill my lungs without resistance. Not because things were fixed, but because I wasn't pretending anymore. There was no illusion left to defend, just truth, and the strange peace that came with it. Near the end of the session, Dr. Matthews said, "You've been surviving them your whole life. Now it's time to live without them." I nodded, and just before I left, she asked, "Do you know what you want now?" I paused in the doorway. "Yes," I said. "I want to build a life where I don't apologize for choosing myself." That night, I walked home from her office instead of taking a cab. The city glowed under the streetlights, busy and different, alive. And as I passed a glass storefront, I caught my reflection. Same face, same clothes, but something in my eyes had shifted. Not hardness, not even sadness. Clarity. The day I decided to redecorate the penthouse, I didn't announce it. I simply moved the couch. Then I took down the framed family portrait from the hallway. Mom in pearls, Dad in a navy suit, Chloe grinning like a child model, and me, barely visible in the corner, eyes tired from overwork and underlove. It went into storage. Not the trash, not yet. But out of sight, out of story. Next came the walls. I chose a bold, unexpected color. Deep violet. Not lavender, not lilac. Violet. Rich, unapologetic, feminine, but firm. I had once read it was the color of transformation, of dignity reclaimed, of bruises healing. I painted one entire accent wall in the living room myself. The brushstrokes were uneven, and I made a mess near the ceiling. But I didn't care. My hands were speckled with paint and pride. Then I ordered a reading chair, not a sleek, modern one, but a plush, oversized velvet armchair in jewel-toned emerald. It sat beside the tall window right where the morning light hit. I added a standing lamp, a blanket, and a side table for my tea. That corner became my sanctuary. A physical declaration. This space is mine. Not just legally, emotionally, spiritually. I even rearranged the kitchen, replaced the cold marble bar stools with warm wooden ones, added potted herbs by the sink, bought wine glasses with curved stems that fit perfectly in my hand. It was subtle, but the penthouse stopped looking like a showroom and started feeling like a home. My home. One afternoon, Margaret dropped by unannounced. She held 2 iced coffees and a paper bag of pastries. Her eyes scanned the room, then widened. "Whoa!" she said, spinning slowly in the middle of the living room. "You went full HGTV on this place." I laughed. "That obvious?" She pointed at the violet wall. "You, purple?" "Symbolic," I said with a smile. "Fresh start." We settled into the new reading corner. The city buzzed below us, but here it felt quiet. Safe. She took a sip of her coffee and glanced at me over the rim. "So," she began, casually, but not really, "you think they're going to sue?" There it was, the question no one else had dared ask out loud. I met her eyes, calm, certain. "If they do?" I said. "I'm ready." She blinked. "You don't sound scared." "I'm not." "Even with the family lawyer, even with Chloe turning the entire extended family against you?" I leaned back into the green velvet and crossed my legs. "Margaret, they slapped me in front of 350 people. They sent legal documents demanding my property like I was a servant, not a daughter. If they want to go to court, fine. I have receipts, witnesses, and a will to burn that bridge down to its last nail, if I have to." Margaret nodded slowly. "Damn." I smiled. not from arrogance, but from clarity. This place, I said, gesturing around, wasn't just built with money. It was built with years of silence, of swallowing pain so I wouldn't upset anyone, of giving them everything they asked for and hoping they'd see me. And now? I paused. Now it's mine. Every inch. Every color. Every chair. There was a pause. Margaret looked around again. I love what you've done with it. Thanks, I said. So do I. That night I lit a candle in the window. Not for them, but for me. Not a vigil, a signal. The storm had passed, and I was still here. Still standing. Still mine. The whispers started 3 days after the wedding. Aunt Deborah posted something vague on Facebook about money-making monsters out of people. Uncle Greg shared a Bible verse about humility and sacrifice. Then a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years messaged me. Hey, is it true you ruined Chloe's wedding and refused to give her the apartment? At first, I thought about replying, then I didn't. Because I knew what they wanted, a reaction, an explanation they could twist, screenshot, forward into group chats. So instead, I saved the message. And all the others. The calls didn't stop either. Some were from relatives pretending to just check in. Others were more direct, accusing, sanctimonious. You embarrassed your mother, one voicemail began. We all saw the slap, but honestly, what you did before, that was worse. I let the messages pile up like junk mail I had no intention of opening. I recorded everything. Names, timestamps, screenshots. Not to retaliate, just in case. What hurt most wasn't the strangers or the distant cousins. It was the silence from people who knew me. People I had grown up with, spent holidays with. People who knew I wasn't the villain in this story. But in their eyes, Chloe was soft, creative, vulnerable. I was the sharp one, the calculating one, the one who made 6 figures and owned property in Manhattan. That made me less human to them, less forgivable. I became the sister who wouldn't share, the villain in a story I didn't write. One afternoon, I met Evelyn for coffee. She looked sharper than ever, hair pinned back, red blazer, phone always buzzing on silent. She slid a folder across the table. They're circulating a version of the story where you promised the apartment, then changed your mind last minute. It's unprovable, of course. All hearsay. I raised an eyebrow. And I wanted you to know, if they decide to sue, you'll win. I leaned back, sipping my coffee slowly. Good to know. She studied me. But you're not going to say anything, are you? I shook my head. No. Why? I thought about it. Why not defend myself? Why not go on the offense and clear my name? Then I looked at her and said, because I don't owe them that. She nodded once, respectfully. Silence, I added, isn't surrender. Sometimes it's strategy. Still, silence wasn't easy. Some nights I replayed it all in my head. The wedding, the slap, the gasps, the sting. Other nights I wondered if I should have yelled back, named and shamed, sent a group email with the truth and the receipts. But deep down, I knew what I was doing. Choosing restraint wasn't weakness, it was power. Let them spin their stories. Let them pass judgment in half-truths. I had the full picture, and I was saving it, not to punish, but to protect myself, to move forward without more drama, more wounds. The truth would surface, eventually. It always does. The next time someone called to get my side of the story, I said this. Thank you for reaching out, but I'm not offering commentary at this time. No anger, no bitterness, just space. The kind of space you need when you're rebuilding not just a home, but a self. 30 days passed, no lawsuit, no court summons, just one more envelope, like the others. Thick paper, stiff edges, hollow threats. Inside, a final warning. Legal-sounding words crafted to intimidate. It ended with, "We hope you do the right thing." I folded it carefully, slipped it into the growing binder labeled, "Family correspondence, for record only." I didn't flinch. Not this time. Something had shifted. It wasn't just time or therapy or Evelyn's confidence in my case. It was me. I was no longer checking my phone in dread. No longer composing mental rebuttals in the shower. No longer rehearsing what I'd say if they showed up at my door. Because now, I knew, they wouldn't. They couldn't. They were bluffing. Power doesn't always change hands with a bang. Sometimes it's quiet. It creeps in through the calmness in your chest, the stillness in your hands, the absence of fear. I sat in my reading chair, newly upholstered in lavender velvet, and held that letter like a relic, a fossil from a time when they thought they owned me. I thought back to that slap at the wedding, how it had echoed like a gunshot in my ears, how it had drawn every eye in the room, how it had lit a fuse I didn't know I had. At the time, it felt like the end, but now I saw it for what it was, the beginning. They had hoped I would fold, hand over the penthouse, apologize, beg. But instead of bending, I'd gone still. Instead of crumbling, I'd organized. Instead of isolating, I'd quietly grown stronger, and they could feel it. That's why the letters got louder, but the actions never came, because power had shifted. I remembered a line from Dr. Matthews. Sometimes they count on your silence, but when that silence turns into strength, it terrifies them. I smiled at that. My silence was no longer submission. It was armor. Margaret called that evening. She always knew when to check in. They still bothering you? Not really, I said, sipping chamomile tea. They're trying to keep the image intact, but I think they're more afraid now than I ever was. She paused. How does that feel? I let the question sit, then answered, like standing on solid ground for the first time in years. It wasn't about revenge anymore. Not really. It was about clarity. Knowing the roles had changed. I wasn't the desperate daughter clawing for approval. I was the woman who had weathered betrayal, stared down legal threats, and still stood tall, inside a home I built myself. A home no one could take. As I turned off the lights that night, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. Not the same woman from the wedding, not the child who longed for fairness, but someone new, someone calm, certain, untouchable. And in the quiet, I whispered, just to myself, I'm not the one running anymore. They are. It had been 6 months since the wedding, 6 months since I walked out of that ballroom with my dignity intact, but my family fractured. Manhattan had passed through summer, then fall, and now December's cold fingers pressed against the city's spine. I was at a quiet cafe near Madison Square Park, one I used to stop by before my long days in court. A little place with overstuffed chairs and jazz on low volume. I was just reaching for my coffee when I heard the door chime, and a voice I hadn't expected to hear again. Lauren? I turned. Chloe stood there, pregnant. Her face was thinner, more shadowed, like she hadn't slept well in weeks. One hand rested protectively on her belly. Her eyes flickered, unsure if she should stay or bolt. I nodded to the empty chair across from me. She sat slowly. Awkward silence stretched between us. I noticed she wasn't wearing the diamond tennis bracelet my parents gave her that night. Just a plain silver band. I didn't know you still came here, she said, glancing around. I don't, I replied. Today's an exception. She nodded, swallowed, then leaned in. I didn't know what they did until later, she whispered. They told me you had agreed to give me the penthouse, that it was your wedding gift to me. My breath didn't hitch, not this time, but my heart did pause. I didn't find out the truth until a week later, Daniel told me. He overheard Dad rehearsing what to say if anyone asked. I didn't respond. I waited. They lied to both of us, she said. I believed them because I wanted to, because it was easier than facing what it meant. Chloe's voice broke. I'm sorry, Lauren, for everything, for believing them, for standing there when you were humiliated and saying nothing, for being so blind. She looked at me with eyes I hadn't seen in years, They weren't entitled or smug or even childish anymore. They were tired, stripped of illusion. I didn't rush to comfort her. I didn't owe her that. But I also didn't turn away. I stirred my coffee once, then said softly, "If you want a fresh start, you have to build it yourself. Don't repeat their mistakes and call it love." She nodded, lips trembling. "I won't," she whispered. That Christmas, my penthouse smelled of cinnamon and pine. There was laughter, warmth, and no performance. Just friends. My chosen family. Margaret brought her homemade spiced cider. Evelyn showed up with a vintage cheese board and the sharpest wit in Manhattan. Dev from work made his signature honey-glazed ham. We didn't exchange gifts, just presents. I wore a deep maroon sweater and thick socks, curled up on my lavender chair, watching my guests fill the space with unfiltered joy. It was a quiet miracle. I had once feared that standing up to my family meant being alone forever, that keeping my dignity meant giving up love, but that night, surrounded by stories, toasts, and music, I knew I hadn't lost love, just the version of it that came with conditions. We toasted with red wine, the lights dimmed except for the tree, casting a soft glow over everything. "Tell us a Christmas memory," Margaret teased. I looked into my glass. Last year, I was at my parents' house, sitting by the fireplace, being reminded I hadn't visited enough, that I'd chosen work over family. I remember wondering if I was broken because I didn't feel at home anymore. "And this year?" she asked. I smiled. "This year I don't wonder. I know I'm not broken. I just needed the right place to belong." The room clinked with gentle applause. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like something was missing, because it wasn't. Just before midnight, my phone lit up. A message from an unknown number. I hesitated, then opened it. It was a photo, an ultrasound. Below it, "Merry Christmas. Her name will be Lily. I hope one day she'll know you as her aunt." My breath caught. I stared at the screen, the dark shape of a tiny life curled in safety. 1,000 emotions welled up at once. Grief, forgiveness, sadness, relief. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I held the phone close to my chest and leaned back against the couch. The snow outside fell gently. Inside, my wine glass still held the last sip. The fire crackled in the corner. And I cried. But it wasn't the kind of crying that left you hollow. It was quiet, cleansing, a soft release. Not every story needed a courtroom or a scream to reach its climax. Some just needed space and silence and time. New Year's Eve arrived, crisp and cold. I stood barefoot near the window of my penthouse, a blanket draped around my shoulders. Outside, the city sparkled, electric and alive. The first fireworks bloomed across the sky in colors of defiance. My reflection stared back at me from the glass. Not the woman who was slapped in front of 350 guests, not the daughter who bent over backwards to earn her parents' pride. Just me, Lauren Mitchell. No titles, no roles, no approval needed. I had given up on waiting for apologies. I had stopped offering explanations. And in that space, between what I let go and what I embraced, I had found myself. My eyes traveled to the reading chair, the purple wall, the kitchen where I had made countless meals for one, and now for many. This was mine. No one handed it to me. No one could take it away. If love demanded that I erase my boundaries, it wasn't love. If family required my silence, it wasn't home. Sometimes you lose the people you thought you couldn't live without, and realize they were never the ones holding you together. I whispered one last time into the quiet, "You just lost me." And I just found me. I never heard from my parents again, and maybe that was a gift in its own way. But Chloe kept sending updates, photos of Lily, short messages, tentative, bridges not yet crossed, but not burned either. I never replied, not yet. But I saved everyone. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always mean re-entry. Sometimes it means releasing both them and yourself. My story didn't end with a family reunion. It ended with a woman reclaiming her voice, but it didn't really end at all, because every day since, I've built something, quietly, steadily, out of truth, not illusion. Before we say goodbye, I want to ask you something. Have you ever had to choose your dignity over your family? Have you ever walked away so you could finally walk tall? If this story touched something in you, share your thoughts, share your story. You're not alone here. And if you're watching this with a warm cup of coffee or in the quiet of midnight, know that we see you. Join our community, not just for more stories like this, but because you believe, like we do, in healing, kindness, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us. And remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock, it waits quietly until you're ready to open the door. Take care. We'll see you in the next story.